Hello, this video is a brief introduction to the Grid Bot Parabolic indicator. A Grid Bot is an indicator that breaks the chart into various intervals. It is a visual indicator where if you can locate areas of support and areas of resistance, the Grid Bot will draw levels at various intervals between those two levels. The basic idea is to buy at a lower level and then exit at a higher level. And in this sense, we can take advantage of market volatility while it's following a specific pattern. On this chart, we see that the market is trending slightly upward and then starts to take a downward turn at a peak. The Grid Bot Parabolic indicator will draw the grid levels aligned with this market pattern. If we zoom in on the chart to the point where the grid start, which is represented by this aqua arrow, you'll notice that various signals are generated. These signals are dependent on the direction of the grid. Signals in the direction of the grid, in this case upward, would be the primary signal, and signals that are contrary to the current direction are called secondary signals. So the first signal on this grid is a buy signal, represented by this solid green triangle, and it was signaled the moment the grids were touched on this level. As price moved downward, and since we're still in an upward moving grid, the next signal generated is another buy signal, and then price returned and moved up to this grid level, and as soon as this grid level was touched, the secondary signal was triggered, which would be an exit or a take profit in this case. And then price returned lower to this grid level, and a buy was signaled again. Price returned up to this level, and a secondary signal was triggered. And then price moved up again, so a second take profit or exit was triggered as a secondary signal. And then price moved down, and as you see on the chart, this continues in a ping pong fashion, allowing you to take advantage of volatility in the market. Let's now go over adding the indicator to a blank chart and the initial setup. The first thing you'll need to do is take a visual notice of the chart and where you want the parabola. And this is all visual, and you may not get it right the first time. That's fine. You can always change, adjust, and adapt the settings. But I see a parabola shape here, starting right here, moving upward and downward. So I'm going to try to estimate this angle by adding the indicator. The way you do that is pull up your favorites menu, make sure you have the Grid Bot Parabolic saved as a favorite, click on it, and it's going to ask you for the start time price. This is the very first bar that you want the grid. And this is really not too important because you can click on it and then change it at any point. But we're going to start here, and we're going to estimate the acceleration and the curve. And once again, you can change this, so it's not important if you get it wrong the first time. I'm going to estimate the acceleration, which is the upward or downward movement, in this case upward, as 10. And you can kind of see it would peak here and then turn around. I'm going to estimate the curve to be -10 in the opposite direction. And again, you can experiment with intervals. I'm just going to guess at about 1.5. We can always change that too. Apply, and we'll see we're pretty close. We may want to adjust this a little bit to shape the market so we can return. And when you return to the settings, you'll see the full settings now that the indicator is loaded. And we're just going to experiment by moving the acceleration a little higher and perhaps adding a little bit to the intervals. You'll see this changes the grid spacing. Let's move it a little bit higher, and let's just assume that this is where we want it. Again, you can always change this and look at this. So we have the parabola in the shape we want, and it does fit the shape of the current market. The market starts trending upwards and then turns downward. And you see the primary signals here are buys, which are solid green triangles, followed by secondary signals, which are against the trend. But at some point, the market tilts, changes, and the primary signals become shorts. And that would continue. And you'll notice that these grids project a little into the future. And our hope would be that price continues in this pattern and we can take advantage of trades from this point forward. If you're not satisfied with this, you can go into settings and adjust this any way you want. If we want to make the acceleration greater and the curve more negative, we can do that. And again, this can shape almost any market. Let's go over some of the settings. And I'm just going to go over the basics. We already know that acceleration moves the grid upward or downward, and the curve controls the curvature of the grid. So the combination of acceleration positive and curve negative causes this parabola shape. In a few minutes, I'll show you how to adjust these to different shapes of the market. The intervals are the grid spacing. Some markets require a narrow grid spacing and some require a larger grid spacing. And this is self-explanatory. The sensitivity we'll go over in another video, but for now you can know that the sensitivity is sometimes needed when switching between assets. The shape of price being 60,000 is a lot different, and sometimes you'll need a higher sensitivity than you would if the price were 1 cent or 10 cents for a lower cost asset. The buy zones and sell zones, we'll keep these at 9 for now. That's in advanced settings, and we'll go over that at another point. But the trigger and the confirmation is a setting you might want to control. Trigger is what actually sets the signal. In this case, the trigger is the wick. So the trigger would be the wick touching the grid line. So as soon as a wick touches a grid line, a signal is generated. However, you might not want to be that aggressive. You might want to change it to close. So if that's the case, the signals are triggered when the close touches the next grid line. Okay, and if a wick touches but does not close at the next level, the signal will not be triggered. Another option would be to choose the midpoint of the candle. And in that case, that's pretty self-explanatory. The signal will be triggered if the candle midpoint touches the next grid level. And then we have the symmetrically weighted moving average, SWMA. And that can be visualized. I'm going to jump ahead in the settings. That's off by default, but we can brighten the color of this blue, and you can see the symmetrically weighted moving average. If you want to keep that on the chart, that's fine. But in this case, the signals are triggered when the SWMA touches the next level. And this provides a lot smoother chart than using the wick or the closes. And let's go back to using the wick as a trigger. But let's look at the confirmation. We have two options. In this case, the signal triggers anytime the wick touches the next grid level. We may want to make it wait until it reverses. So this would mean that the trigger, I'm going to turn the SWMA off for confusion, to avoid confusion, I should say. So we're back to using the trigger is the wick, but the confirmation is a reverse. In this case, the signal will not generate, I'll zoom in, until the wick not only crosses, but crosses back. So this means it reversed. And you'll get less signals here. And we can do any combination of these two. We can do close, reverse. We can do close, touch, and any combination. Now the sentiment, it's defaulting at slope. And what that does is that determines when you're going to take the primary versus secondary signals. In this case, it's going to signal primary signals in the same direction as the slope. So if the slope is moving upward, the primary signals will be longs and the primary signals will be shorts when the slope is tilting downward. If you want to override this and make everything long, you can do that for whatever reason. Same with short, or you can make it neutral, which would just be a primary signal at every level. But you can keep this at default, which is slope. Show signals. You don't have to have the signals. We can just show the support and resistance lines without signals. And the selector is this aqua arrow and line, which shows the start of the grid. And the reason you might want to see this is because in order to change the grid in real time, you can actually find this little dot here. TradingView makes it very difficult to find, but that's why I put the arrow here. So we can slide this to any point we want, reset the grid from that point, and then readjust the settings. And since we're moving the price points, the settings are going to be different. But while we're here, I noticed that obviously this is not the correct shape, but perhaps we don't want a parabolic shape. Perhaps we see here, I'll hide this for a second, we see here a linear shape, just a downward tilting grid. So let's change this grid, turn the curve off, and let's change the acceleration to a negative acceleration. I'm just guessing at 12. We can always change this. And I hid the indicator so we can't see it. So we may just want a tilted grid without the curve. Put the signals back on. We will decrease the intervals. And we see we have a tilted grid bot, no curve. Now, if the market starts to curve a little bit, we can change, just put a little slight downward curve. Or in this case, since we have two negatives, they're canceling each other out, so it's tilting upward, even though it says negative curve. Or we could go the interaction of the negative and the positive. You math guys can probably figure that out, but it has a reverse effect. You can see the curve is moving downward. So we can really adjust this to any level that we want on any asset. The grid colors can be customized. You can make them darker or lighter or turn them off if you don't want to see the top line or you want to make it brighter. Here the support and resistance are brighter. We can turn the lower level down. We can turn the mid levels lower. And then we can also see the projected grids are always going to be lighter, but we can change those. These projected here are beyond the current time. We can control those here by making it brighter. So this was an introduction to the Grid Bot Parabolic indicator. Please feel free to comment, offer suggestions. Thank you very much.